welcome everyone to the first investor meeting that we've been able to hold since the name change and some of the other announcements. We've been obviously in a process of AIM listing and exchange approval now for the last 4 or 5 weeks. It's run very smoothly. It's gone very quickly relative to other times I've done this. So we're now able to say a lot more about the nature of the revised business and the opportunities there. So what I want to do, this deck will be shared after the meeting and will be available on the website. What I want to do is just give you particularly a high view of the technology platform, what makes this unique, and how it's going to sort of shape what we do in the business for the next 6 months.
Just figure out carbon credits.
So we're seeing the front page of the Cabron Done Right meeting. Can someone just confirm that?
Yes, we can see the screen. Thank you.
All right, excellent. It's full screen. Okay. So rebranding, renaming to Cabron Done Right, and carries through sort of.
You want that? No, you didn't.
Hey, Michael, can you mute? Thanks. So the core of the business from KLX is still the core of the business, but we felt like this new name was really making a statement about our commitment to transparency in the context of carbon credit generation, and it's become the real differentiator for us when we talk to investors. The same core team, myself, Kev, and Neil, still running it, still very significant shareholders in the company. The focus of the vision, where we've realized in the market, is while we have some great conservation projects as well, and they'll be a very important part of the portfolio, this model focused on West Africa allows for much more rapid scaling of the development of the projects. And what we're layering into this is a tech-enabled platform where we can count every tree planted, track it using AI models that we've secured from University of Copenhagen, and really ultimately, instead of an investor putting money in or a buyer putting money in and seeing the project at the end of a 12 to 15 month period, this gives them buyers real-time data on the growth of the projects, the specific locations of every tree, and ultimately creates a sort of tokenization mechanism that I'll talk about a bit later. I think we're pretty comfortable with the next slides. Planet is warming. That's why we're all here, and that's still a problem with the hottest temperatures on record in 2023. And when you talk to the scientists, they can't even actually explain why it was as hot as it was. Trust in carbon markets has been eroded by concerns about transparency, and we're fixing that problem. And then smallholder farmers, who actually own 70% of the land in Africa, is owned by people owning less than 10 hectares, are locked out of the carbon markets. And what we've been able to do in Sierra Leone is bring them into the markets by aggregating leases and securing much larger areas of land. So we focus on reforestation and rewilding, enhanced traceability, and then inclusive and fair participation for all the parties involved in the projects. In terms of carbon markets, I think most of you are pretty familiar with this mechanism, but companies that make net zero commitments can reduce their emissions only so far before it becomes prohibitively expensive. And from then they need to buy carbon credits, and they apply the value of those carbon credits, the tonnages, against their own emissions reductions. What we know is that there's 4,000 companies around the world, representing a third of global market capitalization, that are committed to net zero. What we're seeing in terms of the trends from a range of different sources is from Shell BCG to Trove Research to S&P Global to TSVCM, is growth in the market anywhere from $15 to $30 billion, in some cases from BNEF even higher to $50 billion. And we still have high confidence that that's what we're seeing in terms of the growth of the market, and it's certainly what we're seeing in terms of what buyers are interested in. In terms of pricing, on the next slide, again, 5 different sources talking about pricing reaching anywhere from $25 to $40 a ton by 2030. But the more important graph actually is the top one. This was, again, Trove research from last year. It shows red projects, which are conservation, energy efficiency, CO2 gases, and renewables, all below $10 a ton. We've seen this huge price divergence in the last year, where restoration projects of the types that we're primarily focused on are now trading at closer to between $18 and $25 a ton. So we have very high confidence that we're on the right tracks in terms of the modeling. And then we're also seeing regulation, particularly in the EU, related to what consumer companies can make. They're regulating if you say you're carbon newer or net zero, that you have to have that certified. The same kind of pressure is coming through the exchanges. We're starting to see a lot of pressure to do this full sort of cradle to grave, farm to table certification. And so as part of this, we launch the Cabron Done Right certified program and make that part of what we sell to customers. Some of the latest market trends, a lot of which we've press released around, but there's ratings agencies emerging, regulators and initiatives moving for standard practice across all sectors, enhanced data accessibility for verification, and ultimately the availability of much higher resolution, much more frequent cadence data like Planet Labs allows for daily monitoring of these projects, and we're integrating a lot of that into the way that we run these projects. So across the top here, just the different steps of the technology structure. The starting point was what Klimat X was already doing, planting and conserving rainforest and mangrove areas. Tree Counter is a proprietary technology that uses AI systems to identify trees, each individual tree crown. In addition to that, every tree that we plant has GPS coordinates through a system called BEX 360. So as we start to monitor from space, we know exactly where every tree is. And as the tree canopies grow, we start to see those much more visible from space. We have Vera still as the underlying standard, but what Cabron Done Right layers on top of that is an extra layer of security and oversight. And then with the London Carbon Exchange, which we're acquiring as part of the dual listing process, we have a tokenized blockchain system, a smart contract effectively, that allows each ton to be linked back to the specific piece of land that the ton came from. And ultimately, over time, that will support direct purchase and investment into carbon credits as we clear some of the regulatory hurdles around that. Smallholder landowners, why do we focus on this? Well, it's just where all the land is. 90% of farmland in developing nations is less than 5 hectares. The projects we've been able to do have worked because we found the right ways of aggregating those lands and making sure that people are paid their long-term leases. The asset portfolio remains very similar to the ones that you'll have seen in previous decks. The one that we have added in is Ghana, where we've secured a further 10,000 from a distressed project that one of the development finance institutions was involved in. We've had to push out the timelines on some of these just due to financing, but also just due to changes at Vera with the quantification protocols. So we've revalidated Sierra Leone 1 and 2 under the new ARR 47 protocol, which was listed in December of last year, and will be one of the first companies that's validated under that new ARR 47 protocol. In terms of the project profiles, you start to see significant tons from the forest restoration project on the left-hand side in 2028, 2029. We've pre-sold these to BP, so there's a pre-purchase agreement in place that funded that development cost for the first 5,000 hectares. And for mangrove restoration, we've got planting underway this season, and we'll do more planting next season. So we think there's about 60,000 hectares of land in Sierra Leone now that's within our reach, and lots of good input from an independent advisory committee to make sure we're planting the right kinds of species. So the bottom line is every tree we plant, we see with an AI-driven analysis tool. And it's a system that was developed and published in the journal Nature that identified, using a database of 300,000 tree species that NASA provided, every single individual tree crown. So the tree counter machine learning technology will improve over time as we calibrate it more and more against ground-based measures, but it's a unique system that allows us to offer much higher quality assurance we've seen in other places. In addition to that, BEX 360, which we've licensed their technology, is a supply chain monitoring technology where you scan each tree as it's planted and it creates a unique identifier for that tree. Tree Counter is the AI model, and University of Copenhagen's IP, which we've licensed, gives us multispectral, hyperspectral satellite imagery. So you can see in the middle image on the right-hand side, you can see those green dots, which are tree crowns. In the demo app that we've got set up now on smartphones, you can click on each individual tree and see what carbon, what biomass is associated with each tree as it's growing. There's just unprecedented levels of transparency with respect to the project sites. And then lastly, just in terms of kind of planning for a London listing, we've updated revenue projections looking at 2023, 2022, 2023. With valuation for our current assets, we've got our audit process underway at the moment. Sorry, losing the screen there. Some indication in terms of use of funds as we move towards doing a financing as well. How we'd like to use those funds to expand operations. We're also on the right-hand side here, we're going to be one of a small number of companies that get the LSE's voluntary carbon market mark. There's only one other company that has that. And then we have a second green stamp on AIM that ties into carbon markets as well. So very strong story there. Board and executive, the current team, we're adding in Dan as CTO effectively, who's coming from BEX 360 with lots of experience in developing these technology systems. We do anticipate adding another NED in the next few months to have a fully balanced board, but we think this is sufficient for the listing. We've had that confirmed by AIM. And then as we start thinking about financing to support this, this is just a bit of a breakdown of the funds we'd like to raise this year within the next 2 quarters, around $6 million to supercharge the work that we're doing within this area. So I'm gonna pause there, noting that we don't have tons of time, and I want to make sure we've got lots of opportunities for questions. So we did receive some questions in advance, and I'll maybe address those first. So I've given indicate what money do we plan to raise and how that affect dilution. So we are anticipating we'll need to raise capital as part of the expansion of the company. You know, those of you that are monitoring the business will know that it's been a difficult time for the market. We've created some of our own problems by essentially creating a bit of a state of limbo while we're waiting for AIM approvals. So part of the goal now is to get people interested in the stock. There are market reports available to accredited investors from Shard, Hardman Associates, and Hanneman Partners. They're independent reports that are available through their websites if you sign up. If you are an accredited investor, you can reach out to me and I can send you a copy. But these are projecting DCFs for the company ranging from 40 million to 130 million, very sensitive to the choice of discount rate. But those are the best, particularly in the context of AIM, where you're not allowed to show revenue projections in company decks. The analyst reports have to do that. They're showing that the stock as it stands at the moment is very much undervalued relative to what those analysts believe are closer to the real price. Second question was, are there grants or loans available from World Bank or somewhere if everyone's interested in making these investments? Yeah, we've actually increased our effort on looking for non-dilutive grant funding. So we have a proposal that's in the final stages of approval with Invest Salon in the UK for $250,000. And there is lots of funding available for the capacity building side of this. So we're spending a lot of time now looking for those opportunities and starting to secure that funding. It's incredibly time intensive, so we're prioritizing the ones that have the most potential. Is there a way to structure your deals so we can have extra working capital to get by until cash flow starts to happen? Our model with BP was this pre-purchase structure, which is the structure we're talking about with a number of other different parties at the moment. You know, we've previously reported on discussions with most of the commodity traders, with Shell, with Total Energy, and all of those discussions are underway and a big focus of our efforts. Those are important for bringing not just capital to the table, but risk sharing with potential buyers to the table. So very committed to doing that and continuing to do that to make sure we're sharing the risk burden. We are in final negotiations with BP. They have a right of first offer to expand to the full 25,000 hectares, and we've had pretty extensive discussions with them. They've been waiting for the validation under the new ARR 47 protocol. So as you know, that's actually in hand now, and we're expecting a pretty quick turnaround from BP on their desire to expand from 5,000 to 25,000 hectares. You know, revenue projections in 2024, really the best source for that is those analyst reports, but the sources of revenue are most likely to come from further pre-purchase agreements, which we're actively working on now. Recognized revenue is most likely to come in late 2024 if we can finish the Mangrove conservation project. And then in Yucatan, we have a joint venture agreement with Imperative, who are project developers, and that will involve an initial buy-in payment as well, effectively an equity payment to buy into that project too. So, you know, some good signs in terms of revenue this year, but I always, you know, counsel people that the restoration projects mean trees are growing, and that takes a few years before they get to scale. So the big revenue story from restoration work starts in three years or so. The revenue story from our conservation project is going to be much faster, the Mangrove conservation project. It's 1.2 to 1.4 million tons of carbon credits, and we'd expect that to get somewhere around $20 a ton. So pretty excited about what that means for the business. And the last question was just about BP, which I've already answered. We already have extensive discussions with them about the next steps. Let me just look for any other. So just open up the floor now to anyone else wants to ask any other questions. You know, what I can say from this last week of being in London and doing some pre-sale marketing is the appetite for this kind of stock in the UK is very different than in Canada. There are institutional funds and small cap retail funds that are looking for ESG marks and for the highest quality projects, and there's very little available to them at the moment. Certainly nothing that meets the kind of profile and standards that we have. So we do believe that this dual listing is really going to help attract new buyers, new investors for the stock. And we also want to come out obviously as strongly as we possibly can with that presentation in the UK. It's been a very heavy lift over the last 2 months with Faskin's team in support on legal documentation, who've been fantastic to work with, and then Ken as the nomad in the UK, and then 2 lead brokers driving interest in the stock, Fortified Capital and Shard Capital. So you know, came back from the UK on this last trip feeling very optimistic about how things are going. So Doug's question, will the financing be available to Canadian investors? Yeah, Doug, that's a great question. We've been in discussions around a private placement under a life. Haven't announced anything yet, but we've been exploring it. The advice we've had is, you know, see if there's interest in the UK first and get set up to offer that very quickly. So we are working on that already as well. Jamie asked, is the California carbon market something you're able to facilitate? California has restrictions on where credits can come from, so they have to come from within the US and Canada. So we're not developing any projects that will feed into the California carbon market. Any other questions? I will say that in terms of the websites, we are in a bit of a limbo or transition at the moment, where we'll continue to run Klimat X's website as well as Cabron Done Right. That's part of the regulatory restriction that we're under in the UK ahead of a listing. Cabron Done Right tells you a lot more about the smallholder growth and investor program. The Klimat X site still has investor information and a couple of the other projects still on it, and it's not ideal, but we're sort of restricted in consolidating the two websites for another couple of weeks. Another good question here on, are landfill avoidance credits something you work with? We don't do landfill credits. We just focus on nature-based solutions, so purely reforestation and conservation projects. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions.
James, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Back to the pre-purchase agreements, the money that you get for those pre-purchase agreements, is that just to fund the what I was kind of getting at with my question was that, is that just for the operations and the planting of the trees? Like, it doesn't give us any extra working capital?
No, it doesn't. It's structured so that it's ring-fenced just for project expenditures. Now, there are some executive team costs assigned to that, but it doesn't put, it's actually in a separate bank account. It's ring-fenced, so it can only be used for Sierra Leone operations, and that's one of the conditions of the funding.
Oh yeah, okay.
So
Okay,
it saves us money on our corporate overhead in country, but it doesn't help with non-related costs.
Right. Thank you.
A question about the Ghana project. So 10,000 hectares of land. We expect to start nursery construction this year and to be able to potentially do some planting this year in Ghana. The project, the work that was done by the DFI that we're working with suggests slightly lower production than in Sierra Leone. Very similar model, but closer to 10 tons per hectare in Sierra Leone, in Ghana. So, you know, if we can do the full 10,000 hectares, it'll be producing 100,000 tons a year from that site. It's the first site in Ghana. We think there's a lot more potential land of this type. So we'd expect to complete a PDD. It's very similar to what we've done in Sierra Leone, so expect to complete that this year. And then credits starting, you know, typically for those projects, you're waiting 2 to 3 years before you get significant credits, but that's starting within that time frame. And we'd be looking at a very similar pre-purchase structure to what we've got in Sierra Leone. Question around how long until we meet Vera certification. So Vera very helpfully changed the protocol at the end of last year. They did allow a grandfathering period where existing projects that were under validation, which is the sort of process we're in at the time, could continue to operate under the old protocol. But we made the decision that it was better to validate for the first time under the new ARR 47 protocol. So we've now received the full draft of that document, and it's with the validator already. So I expect that the actual validation of that, what's now going to be a public document, to be completed in the next 2 months or so. So please look out for any other updates. It's going to be a busy few weeks in terms of announcements. You know, help us get the word out about the company. I mean, it's frustrating for us seeing the state of the TSXV in general. We want to, you know, we believe there's a lot of value in the stock and a lot of upside based on the analyses that we've seen. You know, we may be one of the sort of few bright lights in the early part of the TSXV for this year, and certainly lots of interest in London. Eric, you had a question?
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Could you give a brief update on your Mexico mangrove project? And are you still in the looking for pre-purchasers or investment interest in that? Or when do you think, typically it takes very long to get a project done?
Yeah.
That area.
So the delay with that project this year has been down to a negotiation between the state and federal government in Mexico. So the federal government had to fully assign rights down to the state government to complete that first phase of that project. We did most of the legal and advisory work for that to support that work, and that was signed sort of early this year. We brought in Imperative as partners who have their own capital and will support a lot of the development work. And the big advantage they have is that they have a large in-house engineering team who are going to take on the work of how you restore the hydrology to the area. And then we've got the Yucatan project has the most pre-purchase investor interest of any project we've got, because it's very high profile. It's in a jurisdiction more of the companies are a bit more comfortable with. So I think within Q2 we'll start securing pre-purchase interest from those investors for that restoration work. So it's advanced well on the technical side. The jurisdictional issues and legal issues have slowed us down a bit more than I would have liked on it, but that's definitely happening. Jean-Marc, there's a question about updated investor deck. Yeah, the deck I just showed you will now be posted on the website, so you can see in a bit more detail what's there. And then Hardman, Shard Capital, and Hanneman Partners have all released reports, which I can, if you can confirm for me that you're a accredited investor, I'm happy to send those over. But otherwise, you have to go to their websites and sign the waivers. But very happy to share those. We can't publish those on our own website as public information. Great. Okay, well, we're at 30 minutes. Seeing no other questions, please do reach out with any questions or queries you might have. I try to be as responsive as I can. If I don't get back to you in a couple of days, please nudge me, because it's an extremely busy time. But I try to be pretty active in getting back to people, and hopefully this is seen as and recognized as the turning point that it is for the company. Very excited about the reception in the UK. Really excited about the scalability of our model and what we can do with this technology platform. And I think this is one of the areas where AI applications really make a difference to the quality of the underlying production system. And we've got some of the best scientists in the world helping us with that. So it's been a really interesting few months.